Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the Think Human video series. I'd like to introduce a very special guest that we've got joining us today, Jeff Gothelf, who works as a coach, a speaker, author, and consultant. He's written some books that I've enjoyed immensely over the past few years, from Lean UX, where he's part of that movement and remains part of that movement to this day. Sense and Respond, which I think is a really important book that talks about applying agile into general management world and introduces this concept of the continuous world that we live in now. And most recently, for Forever Employable. Jeff, really good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
I'm thrilled to be here, Mike. Thanks so much for having me. And it's funny you said Sense and Respond was an important book that talked about bringing agile to the management world, and we did it. I think we only used the word agile once in the book. Yeah. We tried to use it 0 times, but I think we had to use it once.
It was interesting to me, partly because I was, a few years ago, I was working in a business that was very much a waterfall-based approach to delivering services to people, and things took a long time, and people knew only what they needed to know to do the job. I joined as CEO and thought, we need to shake this up and change it. I kind of wish that I'd had your book at that point there, because it may have saved me making a few mistakes along the way. Anyway, listen, I particularly wanted to focus a little around some of the things that you introduce in your new book, Forever Employable, partly because I think it's come at and this is clearly accident rather than design. It came with the emergence of COVID, which none of us predicted, at a time where a lot of people are really thinking about how they respond differently to the unfolding world of uncertainty that's around us. And I thought a lot of the things that you talk about in the book, in terms of planting the flag and getting your message out there and setting yourself up to be somebody that people come to for advice and expertise and guidance, is something which chimes really well on a personal human level, and I think is also incredibly relevant from a marketing point of view to a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to change up the way they communicate with their audience in relation to the changing times that we live in at the moment. I wonder if I could ask you to just give me a little bit of background as to what brought you to that almost happy accident, if I can call it that, with COVID, that happy accident of timing that made it so relevant to the moment that comes.
Yeah, so the book was written as a bit of a memoir, as a bit of a way for me to capture how I've built my current business over the last 15 years or so. Because on a regular basis, maybe on a weekly basis or so, I get an inbound request from at least 1 or 2 people saying, "Hey, how did you build your business? How did you get that speaking gig, or how did you get a book deal, or how did you do that?" And eventually, you sense and respond enough to where you say, there's something here. And so I decided to write down the story and add in all the tactical tips that help build the career. And so it's interesting. It's an idea that sat in my backlog for a long time. It sat in there for a couple of years because it is a personal story, number one. And I've never written anything particularly personal. I've written all, work stuff, business stuff. So there's a personal element to it. And secondarily, it feels initially like a left turn, right? It's not agile, it's not design, it's not lean startup, it's not innovation, it's not customer centric, but it is actually, which is really fascinating. As I began to write it, it became very clear to me that much of the material that I've put together and shared over the years when it comes to designing great products, building great companies and cultures, increasing the agility of organizations, all of that, all of those ideas fit very well when you apply them to yourself, when you apply them to creating the kind of situation that reduces the stress of having to think about the next job, the next gig, the next opportunity. And that ultimately was the motivation, right? There's a lack of loyalty in organizations these days, right? I mean, I have a friend whose father worked for his company, for a company for 40 years, right? That kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore, right? This idea of corporate loyalty and we'll take care of you and we will nurture you, it's very much a dying breed. And so we are constantly looking to kind of improve laterally, climb up a little bit, make a bit more money with the next move, manage a few more people, get a bit more responsibility. And the interesting thing for me was that as I was getting older, that competition, so you're going up the corporate ladder, there's fewer and fewer jobs, and the competition for those jobs becomes increasingly more difficult. Meanwhile, there are better, faster, younger, cheaper people coming into your domain who can do the work that you used to do. And so you're kind of stuck in the middle there. And so for me, that's what was the motivation for changing the direction of my career to be a bit more explicit about creating a platform of thought leadership and to working towards becoming a recognized expert, because that's what I believed and have proven, at least for myself and seeing in others, begins to generate a regular stream of inbound opportunities. And that's what the book is about. So the book is about, it's about my story and other people's stories about how to tactically build a platform of thought leadership and expertise based on the principles of continuous improvement, continuous learning, agility, experimentation. The timing couldn't be better because of all this upheaval, right? You see all like companies are flailing, lots of layoffs, folks are struggling to find work, recession, right? All these types of things. The folks who are doing relatively well, and this is speaking in generalities, right? So, but generally speaking, my anecdotal observation has been that the folks who have built these kinds of platforms for themselves are continuing to do relatively well, right? Maybe they're seeing a down year, but they're not out of a job, right? And there's still opportunities continuing to come their way. And the folks who are perhaps struggling a bit more, especially folks who are mid-career, maybe starting kind of towards the later stage of their career, this is a real big deal for them. It's like, okay, now what do I do? There's no work. So that's what I'm hoping the book helps with.
I think the timing question is a really interesting one, because you spotted the need in your career path. I think you were, if I remember correctly, you were in your early 30s.
35,
when you sort of sat down and thought, right, I need to set this up and do that. And as I recall, it took you a couple of years before the snowball started to gather some pace and some mass. So I guess one of the questions that comes, you talk in the book about this idea of planting a flag, which means you have to have that idea, that identity, that position of thought leadership that identifies what it is that you're going to be talking about. And then there's the question of having planted that, how do you promote it? And how do you figure out how you make what you're doing land in a way that cuts through what's frankly an enormous amount of noise out there in the marketplace for a lot of people who want to be able to plant their own flag and have their own conversations, often about the very things that you want to talk about. How do you figure out what's the best way to approach making those pieces of work that you put out there to reinforce the flag that you've planted? How do you make sure they become visible and they catch fire?
Yeah, so this is rising above the noise is tough, right? There is so much noise out there right now that it's tough. And so this is where the experimentation kicks in, right? So essentially, when you plant your flag, you're making a decision to say, I believe I'm going to become the person who is known for their expertise in X or Y or Z. And maybe you have a couple of ideas initially, and that's okay too, right? But you plant those flags. Those are hypotheses. Those are your hypotheses, right? Your hypothesis is, I believe I can become the recognized expert in business agility for the Fortune 1000 type of enterprise, right? That's where I'm going to plant my flag, and that's what I'm going to go with. That's a hypothesis, right? You need to test that hypothesis, and you need to look for outcomes as the measure of success for that hypothesis. So let's say, okay, if you become the recognized expert for business agility transformation for the Fortune 1000, how will you know? What will people the people that you're trying to reach, ultimately your target audience, right? So, what will they be doing differently? Well, they'll be doing things like reading my posts, watching my videos, asking me to speak, inviting me to come in and maybe speak internally. They'll be asking me to come in and maybe do a coaching or a consulting gig. Those are the kinds of success criteria that you're looking for. The way to get from planting your flag to those behavior changes includes a series of experiments on how to position yourself, what channels make the most sense for you, what formats make the most sense for you, and then kind of what slices of that domain resonate most effectively coming from you for that audience. And so that could be things like, look, I'm going to make 2-minute videos, and I'm going to put them on LinkedIn and really target the sort of the digital transformation hashtag on LinkedIn. That could be one experiment that you can run. And you might say, look, you know what, maybe it's not LinkedIn. Maybe I should write articles on Medium. So I'm going to post a 500-word article on Medium once every 2 weeks about digital transformation. And we're going to see what happens with that, right? And so you start to feel out where to focus your efforts, where to double down, what channels to let go based on that feedback. But I will caveat this with this, and you mentioned it a second ago, this takes time. Unless you already have a built-in audience, it's going to take time for you to figure out where stuff is resonating. It's going to take persistence and some effort. But you can still keep the efforts relatively low, those experiment efforts low, and then start to kind of ramp up and amplify the ones that are actually getting traction.
I think that really plays back to one of the key things that you've spoken about in all the time I've been following your work, which is this idea of don't wait for something to be perfect. Get it out there, have that two-way conversation with the market, see how people respond to it, adjust and continue, adjust and continue, adjust and continue. And you take your kill, amplify, continue approach to that with all of the experiments that you're running, I guess. Does that change in a post-COVID world? Has it changed either in terms of character or in terms of pace, do you think?
I think there's more noise, frankly, online. And I think it's interesting. I was talking about this to somebody yesterday as well. The whole concept of geographic ownership is gone, in a sense, right? You can still have sort of language-based domain. You might say, look, I'm going to be the digital transformation expert for Fortune 1000 companies in Latin and South America, in Spanish-speaking countries, for example, right? If you're a fluent Spanish speaker, right, you might try to go that way, right? But the geographic aspect of any kind of recognized expert, like for example, you're the digital transformation guy in Amsterdam, right? And everybody in the Netherlands knows you as the digital transformation guy in Amsterdam, right? That's terrific. Guess what? Well, you're selling your stuff online. Everybody else is the digital transformation expert can now sell in the same way that you do to your clients. Right? Now, if you do it in Dutch, that may be a barrier to entry that most folks can't hop over, right? Or that might reduce some of the competition. But that whole idea, it's interesting, right? I do a lot of work. I built a class with Scrum.org. It's a professional Scrum with UX course, right? How do we bring Scrum and UX together? And their model has always been geographic distribution, right? There's a trainer in Chicago that teaches Scrum.org courses. There's a trainer in Amsterdam, in London, in Barcelona, in New York, right? Everyone's teaching online. Yeah. I can take anybody's course that I want to now. And so you're competing against a lot more people. And that is definitely a more daunting world in that sense, is that you don't have that kind of geographical ownership. So I think that's one of the big changes that I've seen. I think the other change, and I think is how do you differentiate what you're doing in a world where everything is online right now, right? So 100% of our interactions almost are video conference based, call based, chat based. I think for the last 5, 6 months, we've seen people do the easy stuff, right? So I'll take my content, I'll just put it online, take my content, put it online, I'll mimic what I was doing offline, online, right? We've seen that with schools and with trainings and with speeches and conferences and whatever. What I think you have as an opportunity now is to really stand out in a remote, distributed world, because all the easy stuff has been done, and I think people are burning out. And so then how do you take your expertise, your new global audience, right, which is kind of a benefit, I think, and then differentiate the experience of interacting with you in a remote or a virtual way? So I think, and I don't have a good answer for that, but there's a tremendous opportunity there to really figure out how to, and that can really make you stand out, right? Especially if there are 100 people or 1,000 people talking about the same things that you talk about.
How do you make sure that what you're saying actually has substance? Is it simply a meritocracy, or is there some other secret power that's useful to possess to make sure that people are listening to you?
Yeah, so so look, I hesitate to use the word meritocracy because a lot of stuff that's loaded into it. But look, if you've got the experience, and it's your experience, you've done the work, you've been through the process, whatever it is, right? Then you have substance to share. That's what I believe, right? Now, in my opinion, the secret sauce is writing, communicating in general, specifically writing. I believe that folks who know how to write, who know how to communicate, will be more successful at this. This is not a skill that you can't learn, right? This is something that you can practice, that you can read a book on, you can take a course, but you've got a tremendous leg up if you can tell your amazing story in a compelling way. And if you can tell it consistently, and if you can be and frequently about the same thing. So that's how you start to get this stuff to resonate. But you really need to understand how to communicate successfully. Now, I say writing because I believe writing is probably the most powerful and the most accessible communication method for most folks. But a lot of folks, say, look, I don't like to write. I'm not good at it. I've never been good at it. So you need to find the medium that you're good at. Now, that if it's not writing, maybe it's videos, maybe it's infographics, maybe it's PowerPoint presentations. It could be, maybe it's public speaking. Who knows, right? It could be anything at all. But the idea is that you need to figure out how to communicate your ideas effectively. And again, this is where the experimentation comes in, right? So today, I think that I'm a decent writer. 15 years ago, I was awful. And if I read anything that I wrote, 10 years ago, I can't even stand it. I can't look at it. It disgusts me based on what I think I can do today. Now, along with that, I've learned over time, like for example, that when I publish something new, like for example, right, if I include a graphic that illustrates the concept, right, the traction on that post climbs up exponentially. Right? Some people really like this. There's a group of folk, kind of a percentage of my audience that really loves visualization. And I'm not talking, and again, I'm not an artist. I'm a designer, but I'm not an artist, right? And so I'll put together, a PowerPoint slide that I'll export into a JPEG and publish with a thing. Right? Nothing particularly fancy, but I've figured out through trial and error and experimentation that writing in this way and then adding these particular elements is my most successful communication channel in that sense. But communication is the key, writing being the top thing. And if you're not comfortable with it, I would say take a course or take a class and start to practice.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm hearing a lot of that sense and respond piece going on in the background there, looking at your data, figuring out what works, adjusting based on that. The other thing I noticed was your latest blog post talking about Ikigai, which is a great example of that graphic elements to the to the piece that you've written there. I wonder if I could ask you to just explain a little bit more about what Ikigai is, where that comes from, and what that means.
Absolutely. So Ikigai is a Japanese concept for your reason for being, right? It's the reason you get out of bed every morning. And it's this idea that there are 4 things that you're considering on an ongoing basis. And the intersection of all those 4 things is your reason for being, is your reason for getting out of bed. Now, I'll share those 4 things in just a second, but the I was not aware of Ikigai when I wrote Forever Employable. I describe an exercise in there that is very, very similar, very close. I have a Venn diagram with 3 circles. Ikigai has a Venn diagram with 4 circles. And so I was perhaps a little bit more efficient with my circles. But otherwise, and people started pointing it out to me. They said, listen, this idea you've gotten here is very similar to Ikigai. Have you heard about it? And I said, no, I haven't. And so I looked into it, and sure enough, so Ikigai basically says, look, you've got to consider 4 things as you think about sort of where in the lexicon of Forever Employable, where to plant your flag, like what are you going to build your platform upon? But really kind of, what do you want to do with your life? What do you want to do? Why do you want to get out of bed every day? And it starts off with, what do you love, right? So what do you love? What are your passions? What are your expertise? What are you setting out to do in the world, right? What are the things that you love and that motivate you? The next circle is, what does the world need? And that's a really interesting question, always, especially now, right? But what's missing in the world today? Always good to think about today. Or what does the world need more of that it doesn't have enough of? And again, looking at that kind of thing. What can you be paid for is the next circle in that. And that's really interesting, right? What do you believe you can charge money for is important. And then the last circle is, what are you good at? So just because you love it doesn't mean you're necessarily good at it, right? And just because the world needs it doesn't mean you're particularly good at it. And there's lots of sort of, like, for example, if the intersection of what you love and what you're good at, that's your passion. The intersection of what the world needs and what you love, that could be your mission. There's what you're good at and what you can be paid for, well, that's your profession. And if you can find the center of those 4 things, something in the middle that you love, that you're good at, that you can be paid for, and that the world needs, that's your Ikigai. And that's your reason for being, in theory, according to Japanese culture. And it's a really great place to plant your flag, right? Because you're good at it, you have experience with it, that's guaranteed. You didn't get good at it, you weren't born good at it, I guarantee it, right? You love it, it's helping people out there, and you're making money from it, potentially, right? So this is a great place to plant your flag. And it's a good exercise to run. I ran it recently with a group, a meetup, and really, really interesting to see what people came up with and kind of what ultimately ended up overlapping for folks. And it's not always your professional expertise.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes it's going to be a personal passion, like you play piano or something along those lines, So that's what it stands for.
I think it's a really interesting way to approach how you plant your flag, how you figure out what it is you're going to spend your time doing as you think your way forward. And I think there's a lot to be learned from that. Listen, Jeff, it's been really, really interesting talking to you. Thank you so much for your time today. I've enjoyed the discussion a great deal. I'd encourage anybody watching this video to take a look at Jeff's work. His website is jeffgothelf.com. His latest book, Forever Employable, is a really short and effective read. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a couple of hours at most.
All killer, no filler is one
exactly,
reviewer said.
exactly.
They like that review.
Exactly. And I'd also encourage looking at some of the back catalog in there as well. Jeff, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks so much for having me. This was great.